And welcome to another episode of My Idaho Friends. I am your host, Jaime Lima, still, and today we have a very, very special guest. But before we get to our guest, I want to, as always, thank everybody here at Argos Production, Erica and Justin, for allowing me to be here and bring some impactful and generally fun conversations to our viewers, all three of you and my mom. I was very, very grateful for that. I joke, I kid. So today also we get to share on some wine. This is going to be the first time we're going to have some wine from awesome local winery, Talaya Wines. Also known in French, Cabernet Sauvignon.
I never know if people are serious about that.
Oh, really? Here we are. This is from the Bushy Vineyard. Errol and Carrie are gonna murder me.
Yeah, somebody's gonna fight you for that.
Yeah, they're gonna, I am kidding. I know it's a Cabernet Sauvignon. It's so good and it's delicious. Tai, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Salute and cheers to you. So, Tai Simpson, the storyteller.
Yeah.
Oh man, we're gonna get started. I'm excited. I hope you're excited.
Absolutely.
I'm just feeling the energy. Wendy's over here. Shout out to Wendy,
Shout
your
out
sister.
to my security
Your
blanket,
security blanket.
professional makeup artist and hair. Yeah.
Dude,
Hey.
I don't have that, so people have to deal with this at all times. I'm so very sorry, audience. One day, the production value will kick up. Tai, I do not want to steal the slightest of thunders away from you. So, who is Tai Simpson, the storyteller? Please share with us.
Well, let me start that in my language. Inim winikdwas atitwatit inwas nimipu ayet inim nixasa hiwis timina ilp kanich and aloitzat kina. I'm happy to be here. My name is the storyteller. I am a citizen of the Nimipu Nation. To the colonizers, we call that the Nez Perce tribe. In English, my name is Tai Simpson. I respond to either name, storyteller, Tai, Your Highness, Goddess Divine, etc. All of those things I will respond to. I have been in Boise off and on for the better part of 15 years. I went to Boise State University. I'm from a little bit of everywhere. I'm what sociologists call a third culture kid. So I spent a great deal of time living in Singapore, I lived in Chicago, I lived in Lapway as I moved into adulthood. So kind of traveled the world a great deal. So I'm very privileged and grateful for that because I think it does play into who I am and what stories that I tell.
Yeah.
I think it's important to acknowledge that I'm also a descendant of Chief Red Heart. Our nation is a matriarchy. So I also want to acknowledge that I'm the granddaughter of Lucille Red Heart and the great granddaughter of Lucille Red Heart, Lucy Red Heart, and my mom is Meryl Simpson. We call her Beck. And that matriarchy lineage is important because it defines who we are and how we move and work in the community. So that's something important I want to put on the table. And then it's also important, and I do this everywhere because it's a political statement. You and I are sitting on the unceded ancestral territory of the Niwa or Numu people, so Shoshone, Paiute, Bannock, and Yakama nations. So that's whose land we're on right now, and that's an important recognition more than anything else, I think. Yeah, so yeah, to the ancestors, right? What else? So if I were to get up and walk out of here right now, I think that the thing I would want the audience to know, and I would want you to know and remember, is that the work that I'm doing is old. I'm carrying the stories of generations of ancestors before me. What I'm working for are for all of my descendants who come after me, and so carrying that arc of all of those generations is the most important piece of my work. And it's not for the singular, supremacy of one group or one community or another. It really is about building a community where we can all be the best humans possible. So that's my work. Yeah, that's who I am.
Well, there's an answer for you guys.
My TED Talk is done.
No. We are far from done. We are just getting started. This is going to be so great.
Yeah.
History, lineage, and heritage.
Yeah.
I love that, and thank you. Where did you get started on that path? Because you were just mentioning, not everybody, I'm privileged as well as I've been able to also see the world, but it was through a different lens. I was born in Panama, migrated directly to Boise, Idaho, because I just knew was the place I was going to be.
Who just knows that?
It just, I knew this is my city.
It was calling for
I
you.
love this town. I love this state. But I got to travel and I got to see a lot of places outside of Idaho, and then also throughout the world. Once I was in the military. But this is not about me. This is most definitely about you.
As it should be.
That's what I said. Jeez. But no, yeah. Did that path start with you before, during, or right after your travels around the world? Because how does one go through so many places? That to me is very interesting because not everybody gets that. And I think that's going to be at the core of some of the things that we're going to discuss later.
Absolutely.
Because when you see things from a different lens, different cultures, different peoples, different worlds, their country, it is just perspective and goosebumps.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
please.
It does. When you have the world as your chalkboard, so to speak, I just aged myself right there. When you have the world as your chalkboard, there's so much to learn and so much to absorb. I have a lot of gratitude for my father for creating those experiences for our family. This work and who I am now comes from. Like I said, it started before me. Most immediately, though, my grandparents on my dad's side, my dad's family is Black, I am half Black, are civil rights activists for the NAACP in Chicago, or were civil rights activists. So my entire life I had this incredible example of what it meant to make sacrifices and champion for folks who don't have a voice. I had an opportunity to visit like some of the most incredible libraries everywhere we went because that was the family's priority, like go to the library, like learn how to use and leverage all of this knowledge. And as a child, I was always an avid reader. I think my mom taught me how to read on Lord of the Rings. So there's like 7 languages and like all of this fantasy in there. So I was able to dream and imagine big even as a child. And then down to my father. My father was always like that anger we were talking about before we went live. My dad was very angry, and I don't think that he understood why. Like that was a generation of Black men who didn't know how to vocalize what the pain or the trauma felt like, and he navigated it as best as he could. He survived it as best as he could, and now he's comfortably retired in Singapore. So more power to him. On my mother's side, I just remember my gram being the biggest heart, just this endless place of love, endless place of food, endless place of comfort, and there was always room for folks. The answer was always yes, and then she would just figure it out. And I think that on one hand I had this example of how much can we do for ourselves to earn and generate success, and on the other hand is like how much can we give away to gauge how much we can give back to the community, right? So it's different gauges of success, different purviews of how I'm supposed to live my life. Now, using both of those perspectives, when I traveled the world, in Singapore, I think I innately knew, I started to realize that there were indigenous people worldwide. When I had gone to Australia, touched into New Zealand a bit, Southeast Asia, so we're talking Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, East Asia, there are indigenous cultures across the planet. We can call it pan-indigenous, but indigenous, that's almost a redundant term. Indigenous is indigenous worldwide. And I knew it and I felt it because they had these cultures that had so many similar or parallel stories to my own people. And that was very moving and very meaningful for me. But I also noticed that those indigenous groups were as marginalized and dehumanized in those countries as a result of this international settler colonial regime, right? And we are still feeling the effects of that. Fast forward a little bit to when I moved to the United States, moved back, fast forward a little bit to when I started at Boise State. And I think that was really when my activism started to galvanize. Like the catalyst for it was when the response to our awareness event around Columbus Day at Boise State. And then that was also the same year where somebody wrote the N-word on all of the Obama bumper stickers in the parking garages at Boise State University. So there was no response from the administration. There was no we acknowledge that this is painful and harmful. None of those conversations took place. So of course, there's nowhere for that outrage to go. There's nowhere for the anger to go. And fortunately, 2 of my early mentors in this work are at Boise State still, and never ever deterred me from feeling all of my feelings. They never told me that my anger was misplaced. They never told me that I needed to fuel it somewhere else, or not fuel it somewhere else, but like get over it. I never heard get over it when it came to my rage and anger in response to dehumanization and displacement and marginalization and oppression. Like, so that is an appropriate response, right? When your life, your whole self is threatened by these misperceptions, by implicit bias, by racism, it is a reasonable response to fight back against that. And that's what I've been doing the last 15 years. I made it a point to become an anti-racism, anti-oppression educator. I made it a point to be a community organizer and an activist. I don't suck at public speaking, so I try to use that skill to be a voice for other folks.
I hear you're okay.
Yeah, like, I mean, there are worse things in the world to do than public speaking. So I always try to use what I'm naturally good at. I mean, I'm a storyteller, so what have I seen in the world that is appropriate for telling the stories of why oppression is wrong, why we should be seeking to build better and stronger communities. So I think that's the nutshell version of how I got here. And then you called.
And then I called, and boom, and there you have it, viewers. You're welcome, Mom.
Bucket list check.
Yeah, oh gosh. Educator, activism, and amazing storyteller. I was
in Boise, Idaho, no less. In Idaho, 91% white here. Let me just tell you what
we are one of the whitest states in the union, you know, and sometimes, like it's like glass half full, glass half empty. I feel like I'm exotic here.
Yeah.
Not tiger exotic.
Yeah,
but
on the different side of that same coin, it's all my land, right? Like, so you're exotic, it's all my land, it's fine.
I'm visiting you.
I'm visiting
your neighborhood.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, it's just like, I really like it here.
You can stay, I'll allow it.
Oh, yes. I'm gonna pour one.
Yeah. We still have a lot of time left. Right?
Oh, it's gonna be good. It's gonna be the cabinet sausage just lasts a long time, and it's just I'm gonna go about it slowly.
Yeah.
So, coming back, because people don't give me enough credit because I think I forget, but and most times I do, but this time I do not. So yes, storyteller, educator, activism, activist. What is the range what is your range as far as like activism, being an activist? What is it that you are talking about? Not just to us here in Idaho, but outside of Idaho as well. Mm-hmm. So, I'm kind of poking. I don't want to like pull up my phone and read your bio because I know you know your bio. But
I did those things.
Because you have a website. I don't have a website.
I have a website, TaiSimpson.com, for those of you who didn't know.
And it is awesome. It is. So please tell us a little bit about that.
Activism. I almost think that activism isn't even the right word for what I'm doing. I mean, it's the easiest word to translate to layman, right?
And this is all layman right here. Yeah. So you're just gonna have to put up with that. That's one thing. I'm not very fancy. No. Okay, I'm not dumb, but a layman, definitely.
For women of color across brown, black, and indigenous communities, activism is survival. What looks like activism to everybody else is actually all of the women in these communities hanging on to our languages and to our art and to our culture and to the way that we raise babies, to the way that we connect and build community, to the way that we cook, to the way that we sing. All of that we are trying to ensure survives everything that we're facing when it comes to white supremacy, when it comes to settler colonialism, when it comes to the machine that is really just dividing folks in this country, right? And so while I'm out here trying to make sure when it comes to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirit relatives, like, I just want my people to be alive and to be safe and to live lives where they can enjoy safety, right? Nobody should have to enjoy safety. Safety shouldn't be a luxury. It should just be a human right. And it's not for some communities, right? Black women are a close second behind that as far as missing or unsolved murder cases, mostly predominantly urban centers. When it comes to me starting all of my speaking engagements as much as I can in my Indigenous language with what few or with what many words I may or may not have, like, that's me trying to honor my ancestors who literally lost lives during the Indian Wars so that I could still be speaking this language. And so revitalizing that culture, that may feel like activism, but that's really me just trying to help my ancestry survive these really tumultuous times. And then when it comes to blackness and social movement spaces and social justice spaces, we have never moved the needle very far from slavery, right? If we look at the big picture of the way the United States is structured, the United States was literally built to dehumanize and commodify human bodies, starting with indigenous folks in southwestern United States, and then it evolved into West Africans being displaced from their homelands, even northern and central Africans being displaced from their homelands. They, again, going back to this idea of worldwide indigenous, were indigenous to Africa. So indigenous is indigenous, whether it's black or indigenous to the United States. I always like to make that point because I am a sociologist after all. So that activism, again, is about a fight for humanity, right? At no point in the United States have black communities had equal footing with their white male counterparts, and that's unacceptable to me. So my tireless work is to make sure that we build accountability into these systems that we currently have, that we try, make an attempt to elect folks who represent these marginalized communities, that we ensure policy and laws reflect inclusivity and community and abundance for communities that are marginalized, because we're always an afterthought, and that is unacceptable to me. So that's what fuels this work. It's about survival. And if I can do this work now, then it means my nieces and my descendants after that can live the life that I'm dreaming of for them. Yeah, you're welcome. TED Talk number 2.
We got a lot of time. So I joke about being simple-minded, but I also know that I happen to. I know enough to not know everything, right? And I'm very much aware of that, and always looking to learn. And there are people right now in this current environment that are looking to learn more and looking to get involved. And at some point in times that can be exhausting. At some point in times that can be refreshing. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it can be both at the same time.
Both and.
Indulge me, please. I get the feeling that perhaps there might be a couple of. I always tell them that this is my friends, because it will never be your friends. It will never be my wife's friends. It will always be my friends. That perhaps do not even know what settler colonialism. English as a second language, just bear with me.
No, está bien.
Settler colonialism means. So you touched on that. Could we touch a little bit on settler colonialism and then turn that needle back into accountability, and what does that look like? Because a lot of acquaintances, friends, strangers, people that I care about, people that I don't give a shit about, accountability is just like, it just makes everybody so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it's something worth talking about. So I think that's kind of sort of a bit of a good segue. We start with that, explain what it is.
Yeah.
To me, of course.
Start with the square one.
With the square one, because I need to know. Our viewers do not, but I do. Mm-hmm. And then go from there into accountability, please.
Oh, absolutely. So settler colonialism. I mean, on a timeline, just to keep things as simple as I can, we're going to start with contact, what is called contact. So when European conquistadores or European explorers, pilgrims, whatever we want to whitewash them to, made contact with indigenous nations in North and South America is when settler colonialism began. We like to talk about America as this nation of immigrants. That is false. England, France, and Spain made their way across the ocean with the purpose of conquering it for resources, right? Yeah. It was the purpose of those explorations were about extraction, they were about conquering, they were about enslaving, gold, whatever it was. Like the entire purpose of that exploration was to colonize. Colonization at its root is to completely displace a way of life for a certain group of people, a certain tribe of people, with the more dominant lifestyle. So in this case, it was, bringing in the colonial system that was the genesis of the United States. So colonies, their constitution, their drafts of the Constitution, their constitutional convention, all of that stuff.
Their religion.
Yeah. While they had influences from the Iroquois Federation, which we should acknowledge, they were really trying to bastardize what monarchy that they had and then make it less of a monarchy here, but still power isolated to a few folks. And those few folks were the only ones who could vote, the only ones who could own land. God forbid a woman had an opinion or a voice, right? And that now is the foundation of this country, the way the Declaration of Independence is written. I am a merciless Indian savage. Black folks are not counted as whole humans, right? Like, we haven't fixed that. That's a problem. And then as we move along the timeline with settler colonialism, it's saying we can no longer speak our languages. We have to go to church. We can no longer have matriarchies where the women are running our communities versus the men. We can no longer educate our children in our old indigenous ways. We have to cut their hair, send them to these missionary and boarding schools. We can no longer live in teepees. We have to engage in what we know as European-style agriculture. No longer can we gather and harvest in our old ways. So settler colonialism essentially disrupted our entire way of life, our entire way of being, and our entire ways of knowing, so that they could replace it with this system meant to exclude and dehumanize and marginalize us. So that is settler colonialism. Does that make sense? Well, I mean, does it make sense to you? I hope it makes sense to the rest of the internet, but...
Oh, the internet knows all.
Yeah,
because
the internet...
nobody's wrong on the internet.
Not ever.
Not ever. So thank you. Thank you for indulging me. I really appreciate that. And
no, that's important. Mutual understanding.
Yeah, I really think so, because sometimes we... and this is not a reflection on you, but a reflection on me. If I've done it, with like my line of work and then my previous line of work, that I just start spitting out my game, only to realize that I have lost over half of my audience because they just don't know what the F I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And then I just take a breath and I'm just like, my bad. So, not saying you did that, but I think it's really important to go over it, and I thank you for being patient with me about that. I really appreciate that.
It's a good place to start.
Now, let's crank this B up a little bit. Accountability, which is what makes everybody, not just white people, I mean everybody, just be like, what are you talking about and why?
And it's a very defensive response. Right?
Absolutely. It's like, what did I do wrong? Like, this was 20 years, 40 years, a century ago.
Yeah.
It's been a millennia.
I wasn't there for that. If I had $1 for every time I heard that, your girl would be a millionaire. And I wasn't there for that.
And this has been, so I was born and raised in Panama, but I migrated, to straight up to Idaho on Christmas of '94.
Oh.
So
memorable.
Yeah, I don't like it. My neighbor calls me Panamanian Jesus. It's just
wow.
Shout out to Kevin.
Wow.
So it's just kind of like.
I mean, I'm not shouting out to Kevin. I've got other words for Kevin.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So it's like fellow Marine. Just like, oh boy. But like, and we can have an offline conversation about that. But like when I have these conversations, as I have gotten older and reconnected with people actually from Panama, right? Because of the magic of the internet and social media and Facebook. And I go, oh my gosh, we went to the 8th grade together. And I just kind of been reconnecting with people that I never thought would even remember who I was. And I go, oh, Lima, my last name. And that has led me to engage in some meaningful and rather difficult and uncomfortable conversations with those who I grew up with and those who I'm here with now. And it's always a joke, right? It always starts with I'm not racist, or it starts with something along the lines of, well,
I'm not racist, but.
Or like my favorite from my community, it's like, as a veteran, and I'm like, just stop right there, bro. It's like nobody cares, and it's just not, that doesn't make you an expert on this subject matter, so let's just take a breath back.
I might tag all of my brother's friends at this moment on this video later. For that reason. I'm not racist, but okay.
Right, but some of the things that have gone, back like several years, as you're studying history and whatnot, and we were talking about Panama. Well, what's so great about Panama, right? And I was like,
has nobody read a history book?
About cultural, everybody just thinks about the canal. It's like, that's great. 2% of the world economy goes through on a daily basis, except now because apparently there's a virus going on. I don't know if you watched the last episode of my Idaho Friends.
You should take your land back.
You did.
That's a good time to take your land back, sir.
Go back. But we're having conversations about gold, and it's like, well, if your country was so rich and all this and all that, well, it was, and it came and it got sacked, man. Like, everything's gone, and and then the question was presented. It was like, well, how do you hold somebody accountable for that? Well, the first thing is having the conversation and not have it be made fun of and have it be like ridiculed. And again, I'm not as advanced as you are, but my train of thought and common sense, it will be like, then it's acknowledgement.
Yeah.
And I was like, you just look back, and I was like, you know what, country, my bad, that's fucked up. We did this because of like kings and queens and everybody coming across
But
the
nobody
seas.
wants to say that out loud.
But nobody wants to do that. So,
Yeah.
getting that
Accountability.
now, because it's not about me. It's now that I got that off my shoulders. Thank you. And in a far more relevant way to today and here and around us. What does accountability looks like?
I'm going to start with some philosophical framework for this. Philosophy tenet number one: we don't know what we don't know, right? Good philosophy is just the process of asking questions and then asking more questions. And then tenet number three: when you are presented with new information, you are supposed to change your perspective on the world. You are supposed to adjust for what new knowledge you have. And that, I think those three things essentially make up critical analysis, which nobody does anymore. So that's square one, preface number one. There's our foundation, a philosophical foundation to understanding accountability. Here's also, I'm going to answer your question with a question. Does a thing, let's start it this way. If you stole something, gave it to your children, they gave it to their children, they gave it to their children, does it ever become owned, or is it still stolen? You're welcome. I'm leaving now. That is essentially what settler colonialism has done to every Black, brown, and indigenous community in the United States. Africans, stolen from their homelands, their humanity literally stripped from them for the purpose of labor and building the United States. Migrant labor out of South America and Mexico and Central America, also same thing. Migrant labor has built the country. And their land was also stolen from them. Indigenous folks across Turtle Island, North America and South America, our land was legitimately stolen and then just conveniently passed generation to generation as wealth, right? But at no point was it ever not stolen. Like, it is still stolen. And that's what people or governments or policymakers never acknowledge. I don't care if this is 5 generations, 6 generations down the line now, y'all are still on stolen shit. Like, if we don't necessarily have to give it back in the way that we did, that's what I want. In the end goal, I want our land back. But the accountability piece is saying we are now living, operating, and succeeding, extracting resources and building capitalism, which is also trash. That's a whole other TED Talk for a different day, off of stolen land. And then the expectation is for all of these Black, brown, and indigenous communities to say, oh, thanks, and then pledge of allegiance to America. If there is nothing more gaslit in the history of mankind, it is that. And I can't, like, that's one of the things that gets me super hype about this. So the question of accountability, right? Let's have a conversation about the fact that I just want my white neighbors to acknowledge that they are thriving on stolen land and that the descendants of the folks whose land has been stolen are now marginalized, living in cultures of poverty, living under laws that are oppressive, lack of inclusivity. Like, I could go on and on and on, but that came from settler colonialism, and that is a conversation of accountability that we need to have. So once folks acknowledge that there's a problem, then we can start to talk about solutions. Then we can start to talk about reparations, right? Then we can start to talk about giving their land back, right? I think that what happens is that white supremacy is perpetuated and so insidious in this country that the idea of giving our land back means that they have nowhere to go. I mean, that may or may not be the case. Like, I wouldn't kick my white neighbors off of my land. I would just say, hey, now you are a guest on my land, as they are, right? Now we're going to put it on contract. And as a matter of fact, we should probably get the money or some value off of what you've made off of this stolen land, right? That's the community accountability piece, and that's making sure that everybody is taken care of. It's not saying we don't want you to have. We're just saying that these folks who haven't had because their land was violently taken from them, how can we make that right? How can we bring us to a place that is equitable? And when people think about equality, they think like, oh, just saying land acknowledgements, or oh, they have reservations now. I'm going to give you an example from the Nez Perce Indian Reservation. We used to have 70 million acres. We have 700,000 now. Like, just the sheer, like, vast amount of land that we used to have to this fragment, to this tiny exponential fragment of what we are now in control of. And somehow they think that that is a legitimate retribution for having our land stolen from us. But it's not just stolen from us. Any of the money that's made, any of that land ownership is still in trust with the United States. So we still have this incredibly weird, abusive relationship with the United States controlling our shit, which is also very frustrating. So accountability can't be had until we name the problem. Indigenous people, black people, brown people, we've all been naming the problem. It's our white brothers and sisters who won't do it. And that's the problem.
I'm going to try to compartmentalize this.
Good luck.
Of course.
Good luck.
Of course, not for our viewers, but for me. I get
Yeah.
it's me, Wendy. I'm the one that doesn't know. Couple of things, and this in no particular order, however you want to do this. Because I've noticed people don't know what the heck gaslighting means, and you mentioned that.
Oh, yeah.
So you know, I just
You're so nice to your viewers. Like, there's literally an encyclopedia in their hands. Like, they're probably on their smartphone right now. They can Google it, Jaime.
they can Google it, but sometimes it's been on my limited experience that's just like, in order for people to digest, you just got to chew it up for them a little bit. I'm not saying that that's right. I'm just saying that perhaps, you know, I happen to have a subject matter expert, and it matters when a subject matter expert says it than when freaking Jaime says it, because nobody gives a shit about Jaime.
Okay, I'll allow
Okay.
that. I'll allow that. All right.
So, gaslighting, white supremacy, okay, because people get nervous, or like you mentioned, or white brothers and sisters,
Yeah.
okay, allies amongst them, and some of them not so much, okay. You say that, and then you say, wait a second, I ain't got no swastika on my forehead.
What about black supremacy?
And
Blah,
just
blah, blah, blah. Yeah,
thank
that's
you.
been my life this week.
Oh man,
Yeah,
and
it's
people
so
wonder why we
cringy.
drink.
Yeah, right? I drink because I have to, not because I want to.
Yeah,
Anyway.
and I think, you know what, that's, and there's so much more, but we're gonna get started there, because we're gonna take a 90-degree powerful turn here in a little bit. And,
Okay.
you know, we already discussed that a little bit ahead of schedule before we go into the local level, which is what matters. I mean, the name of the show is My Idaho Friends, not my freaking Northwestern friends. Or,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Idaho.
so gaslighting, white supremacy, and then the question, and then there's a question at the end. Have you noticed, or are you aware of, or do you know of any nation, any country outside of the United States that is taking accountability for what they're doing or what they have done to their indigenous people? Because that's an important thing.
That's a heavy ask. Okay.
And again, I'm a simple man,
No, that's quite all right. Yeah.
but please.
Yeah. I'm obnoxiously complex, so I think that we're balancing each other out right here. Like, I twerk a little, I read all the books, like, I'm ratchet, but I'm super classy, like, all of the things. It's fine.
I'm so classy,
Everything's fine. Let's start with white supremacy. Folks get really cringy when they hear the term white. Like, one of the things that I've learned as an anti-racism educator is white people don't like to be called white. I don't know what that is. They have no problem saying African American or Caucasian, or they don't even like to say black, or they'll say Native American or American Indian, right? Language matters. So that might actually be a whole conversation for a different day. But white folks are white, black folks are black, indigenous folks are indigenous, brown, black, indigenous, white. Like, those are kind of the standard sociological terms for the way we understand race, the racialization of the United States. White supremacy is hand in hand with the engine of settler colonialism, because France, Spain, and England are all predominantly white countries. When they began to colonize and extract resources from the planet, that supremacy that was established was that only English names or French names or Spanish names are appropriate. Only their churches are appropriate means of deity or worship. Only their foods and clothes are appropriate. Only the things that they decide are the standard are appropriate. And we don't even realize that we're doing it, right? So let's talk about, like, when we're hiring, where folks who have ethnic sounding names won't even get an interview on if their name on their resume sounds ethnic. My mom was really clever about that. My brother's name is James versus, something less or something more ethnic. What I like to see nowadays, like I've got there are folks in our community, a young man named Hahaks, which is a translation for bear out of our language, right? We have a Witalu, which is the word for dove in our language. So using and revitalizing our language that way, in the way that we name each other, is an act of decolonization. So that's something we can put a pin in. Let's move into like this really obnoxious thing that Americans do, where you speak, this is America, you have to speak English. Like, at no point has the United States ever declared an official language. The United States doesn't have an official language. Like, it's just something we've never done, nor have we ever needed to do. But this idea that you have to speak English in this country, and then we belittle or berate folks who speak multiple languages, as if that's some kind of easy feat, right? You speak 2 languages, right? Like, I've met some children who speak 4 languages. Sometimes English is 5th on that list.
Yeah.
But these are folks who can speak and communicate in several languages, and we disparage that? That doesn't make any damn sense to me. So standardizing English is also a function of white supremacy. Ensuring that white women are kept safe and black women are seen as angry. White women are pure and modest, and indigenous women are seen as free and like sexually promiscuous, or like prostitutes, right? So it's this really ugly negative imagery attached to black, brown, and indigenous communities. Black men, exploitation, fetishization, sexualization, like the hypersexualization of black men in this country is a thing. And you can even see it at some of these rallies recently. There was a woman whose sign says, "I love black dick, my voice will be heard." That was at a Black Lives Matter rally. And then there was something about a man who had white children, so his voice needed to be heard. I don't know, it was just like this weird, obnoxious xenophobia that exists in relation to white supremacy. So that's what it means. And even the nicest, loveliest little old white people on the planet can still perpetuate white supremacy. I don't know what it is about folks, especially in Boise, where everyone's like, we're Boise kind, we're so nice here. You can be nice as hell and still be a racist asshole, and still perpetuate racism, and still say things that are harmful. And that is a conversation folks don't want to have either.
And just because you do not know doesn't mean that you cannot learn, grow, and or take accountability.
When you are presented with new information.
With new information, which is what becomes really difficult. Because that's happened to me too. And like, you know, when I say something like, "Oh, that's good for you to acknowledge it." Well, like, no, I didn't do it so you clap for me, asshole. I want you to do it because I want you to do it with me. Like, if I can effing do it, maybe you feel a little bit more comfortable doing it, and then we can all grow together. It's not a competition.
No,
as a matter of fact, if you can get ahead of me, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry.
Yeah. What was that second piece? So it was white supremacy and what else?
White supremacy, gaslighting.
Gaslighting.
I always blame it on my friends, my poor friends. Because my friends don't know. Because I don't know.
Okay. I really hate that I don't know the origins of the term gaslighting. I just know what it means and its application. Gaslighting is a process in an abusive relationship where the abuser manipulates the situation in such a way where the victim absorbs all of the fault, all of the grief, all of the blame, and all of the shame associated with their own abuse. For example, I'll use my own experience with domestic violence. I was in a relationship for several years. I almost married him. He was incredibly violent and incredibly emotionally abusive. And every single time we had an incident, he would say, "Well, why would you make me treat you like that? Why would you say this thing so that I did this to you? When you do that, I get angry." And just those are the kind of the common things that you hear. He was also a narcissist. So everybody around me loved him. He was charismatic and he was dynamic and everybody was just drawn to him. He was incredibly attractive. So anytime I sought help outside of my mother and outside of my brother, people were like, "Oh, I just don't believe that he would do that to you. Something must be wrong with you." Again, further gaslighting. On a big picture, now that you have that small example, the United States, for them to champion, I'm going to use another contemporary example. The president announced a missing and murdered Indigenous women's task force called Operation Lady Justice, where they're committed to addressing the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous Native Americans throughout the country. That's great on paper. They championed it. It got all sorts of news cycles. But they put predominantly white men on the task force to lead this research and this understanding in Indian country, which is completely, opposite of what we're asking for in Indian country.
So no First Nation members?
There's 1 or 2 First Nation members, but there are not. It should be entirely indigenous led.
Right.
But the gaslighting piece is, these communities should be thankful that we're doing this. You should be appreciative that we are giving you this time and this energy.
You're welcome.
Yes,
Nobody said thank you.
Nobody said thank you, but they're like, you're welcome, and then they tout it as an accomplishment.
And
they tout it
roll
as
with it.
yeah, it's a hot
Isn't
mess.
Isn't it even like a separate small rabbit hole? Sorry, I cannot help myself. But isn't it like you cannot do law enforcement? Correct me if I'm wrong. At a reservation, unless you are, from, indigenous as well. Am I mistaken, or am I?
Yes and no, both and. So in some
Half
no,
right.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Thank you for gaslighting me in real time.
In real
Jaime.
Everybody's learning together.
Yeah.
Everybody's learning together.
There are 534 federally recognized tribes in the United States. That federal recognition is also some bullshit, so we're going to put a pin in that also. But there are 534 federally recognized indigenous nations in the United States. Not one of them identically enacts their own sovereignty, right? So the Nez Perce tribe operates differently than the Coeur d'Alene tribe, which operates differently than the Shoshone-Bannock and Shoshone-Paiute tribes. In my tribe, our tribal law enforcement is interracial. We have white dudes, we have indigenous dudes. I think we had a Mexican guy at one point. The chief of police is a member of the Nez Perce tribe. So there's that. I know that our response task force to COVID-19 was also an indigenous person, Nez Perce man. So but there are other agencies like I think it's Rosebud or it's Standing Rock, where they don't have their own tribal law enforcement. They actually have FBI agents that have jurisdiction on their indigenous.
Straight up federal.
Straight up federal. Yeah.
We're going to skip the community aspect.
Yeah.
Of,
No, it's just and that also can more or less cause some issues, especially when those officers are perpetrators of violence against indigenous women. So they turn their cheek to it. It's like all of these interconnectedness of hot shit messes on indigenous country. Like
Right.
it's a thing. This is why I do what I do.
Yeah.
Right. This is why I have to tell all these stories.
Yeah.
Where was I going with that? The tribal law enforcement thing.
Yeah.
So no, to answer your question, yes, some tribes demand that only tribal members can be law enforcement officers.
Mm-hmm.
Other tribes say it can be inter-race. It could just be anybody who's qualified. Some tribes just skip right to federal marshals and federal FBI agents. Okay. So that could. We're not a monolith. We all do it differently.
I think this is going to be a continuing conversation.
Yeah.
Because this is a question, but it's not a question that I'm asking you to answer right now. It is, I am trying to get you hooked. I am trying to get you to like me. That will be important to me.
You're still on the fence, man. Daniel hasn't said yes or no, so I am still on the fence, and I hope you heard that.
Shout out to Coach Daniel at SBE. And that's how I know about Tai, not only about her fine work, but she can also hit some pads like nobody else's business. So yeah, to our combat fitness community here, SBG Idaho, much love, friends. Mm-hmm. It is really important to me, and I will tell you offline through a different conversation. And it should be important to everybody, of course, not just me. This is certainly not about me, but why are indigenous brothers and sisters an afterthought? Why are not the original Americans after we know everything that we know now? Because there's so much knowledge. Ancient Greece used to pray to an oracle that was not real, and now granted there's a lot of misinformation. I get that. There's some gaslighting going on now that we know what gaslighting is, guys.
Hey.
You see what I'm getting at? But why is it so difficult? And that's not the question for right now. I am just really trying to get you to come back.
I'm going to give you a metaphor to answer that. So we're not going to go into it, but I'll give you a metaphor for that.
Shoot.
If you were an asshole and you walked into a house to steal everything out of that house, would it be easier to do it if there were the family that lived there? Or would it be easier if it was empty? Yeah, that's why.
Go on.
They don't want us in the house.
Cabinet sausage.
Can I have more cabinet sausage, please? Thank you.
Telaya wine, Earl, Carrie, and the family and crew.
Oh, I love it. I love that we have Telaya. It's one of my faves.
We love you guys. Don't get mad at me. picked up my case yesterday. I'm pretty happy. Last question before we take that 90-degree pivot,
Okay.
and we all take a deep breath. You probably don't need it, but I do.
No, I need a deep breath for
Okay.
sure.
I am definitely not. I'm not as strong as I thought I was. as I think I am.
I am a tornado and a hurricane, man.
Yeah, no,
Like,
I'm totally cool with that. I'm totally cool with that. You know,
Yeah.
and so everybody do perspective for people that are watching. You know, Wendy, your sister, you know, who is not on camera right now, is like, you don't want to, or it was you don't want to tell a predator that you're scared, which I love. I absolutely love that, because I actually think of myself in that realm, and I think it's important sometimes where like myself, when I look back and where I am right now, and just having the ability to be like, Jaime, fucking learn something. So I loved every second of that interaction. That was cool, and you're always welcome to do that in this segment here with us at any time. Okay. And I not only say welcome, but it's encouraged.
yeah, I'd probably do it and ask forgiveness anyway. So, thank you for giving me permission, though.
Hey, gaslighting.
Gaslighting.
Oh!
You're winning at gaslighting tonight.
I know, everybody's learning so much. If there's anything that is gonna go like white supremacy, like fuck that shit.
Yeah.
Like, oh my god, like the struggle of the freaking indigenous people, you know, which are very, very important. But gaslighting, we covered that well.
Yeah.
And the last
you,
question,
yes.
which is like, you know, this is kind of like a bit of a tutti frutti question. It matters, but I'm just out of curiosity. It could be that you just don't know, and then the answer is no. I mean, I don't fucking know, and that's fine too.
Okay.
But you know all the things. Are you aware, or do you know, as Wendy laughs in the background, I like your sister. She crushed my hand, by the way, guys.
Same.
We're all going to be friends. Is there anywhere outside of the United States, or maybe perhaps somewhere within the United States, Konos or Okonos, continental United States, outside of continental United States, is there a place that is trying to do it right? Is there a place that is doing it right? Is it in Fiji? Is it, I don't know, you can, the Argentinians turning it around, or is there some other country that I don't know the name of that is just doing it better than everybody else? Perhaps Singapore. I am curious as to if there's, where's the hope? Where's the example? Okay.
Where's the hope? Yeah.
You see where I'm getting at? Because I know I downplay myself a lot, and I do that on purpose because I want my audience to be cool with it. You know.
Fun
It's just
fact,
like-
self-deprecation is a trauma response, but we're going to save that for another
That is
conversation too.
fucked up.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
No, welcome at all.
Again, another conversation.
Another conversation. Oh God! So there's a whole case of wine after this. But yeah, but like seriously, like where's the hope? And if there's not, are we doing a good job creating that hope here?
I spent some time in October at the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Conference on the Coeur d'Alene Indian Reservation, hosted by their Stop Violence program. Bernie is their executive director and now one of my auntie matriarchs, and I just have a deep love for her. She brought in a panel of speakers that shared the most raw, painful, excruciating stories of violence and trafficking and rape and abandonment I had ever heard in close proximity like that in my life. And I was emceeing the whole thing, right? So in real time, I'm trying to hold space. But there was this little old woman, I think she said she was 74 years old. And she finished this really, really painful story. And at the end, before she passed the mic back, she's like, but you know, there's always hope and there's always love. Sorry, that might choke me up a little. But to hear that from a woman who's 74 years old, who made it through forced sterilization, who made it through the boarding schools, who made it through Indian relocation, her own instances of sexual trafficking and violence and abuse, and at 74 still hung on to hope and to love. So yes, there is always hope and there's always love. And So where I look for those things is what changes, like, and influences and informs my work, right? As long as there's trees, as long as there's grass, as long as there's air, as long as these rivers are barreling through these mountains, there's hope and there's love, because they were here before all of us, right? They sustain who we are as humanity. So there is always hope and there's always love. In a more practical sense, Hawaii is building these community programs unlike I've ever seen before in my life. Hawaii never conceded their war against the United States. They never gave up. Technically, they're still at war with the United States. So when it comes to their agricultural programs, economic development, agriculture, it's always indigenous led. It is always indigenous Hawaiians who have voices, the strongest voices at that table. If we move further east into Australia and parts of New Zealand, everything there, indigenous-led, amplified indigenous voices. I mean, in any sort of settler colonial society, there's going to be obstacles to that. But by rejuvenating and centering those relationships, you can start to see a lot of progress. You see forests coming back and regrowing. You see plant life that wasn't there before coming back, because the original stewards of that land, who carry 15,000 years of knowledge in their DNA, are now making the decisions about how to take care of that land and take care of their water. So as long as those conversations are happening somewhere in the world, there is always hope. We just don't do it here, the rest of the United States. We don't do that here.
This is about Mahmoud. This is about Brianna. This is about George. This is about Tony. This is about Emmett. You know, once upon a time, there lived a little boy down the street. Blue eyes, brown skin. I called him Khalil. But the world called him Love.
Broken down, tired, living life merry-go-round. You can't find fighter. They see it in you, so gonna walk it out and we'll move mountains. We can walk it out and move mountains. We'll rise up and we'll do it together. We'll rise up high like the waves rise up. Despite of the edge, we'll rise up and we'll do it together. I'm talking about my fallen brothers and sisters right now. For you. For you.